I think there are several pieces which changed during the times, and the perception nowadays is a bit different. Let's take as an example Fat House or the whole Fat series. At that time when I did it, for the first time, it was purely for me working with the notion of sculpture, like changing masses and volume in relation to this changing content. So coming from the idea with the daily life in relation to the sculpture, coming from the idea when we gain or lose weight, we change volume, so one could say this is sculptural work. So this was the primary idea, the first idea. And then, of course, it became a social component because our society, especially the Western society, is becoming more and more obese. Now, with climate change destroying our world, all of a sudden it became a totally different component, which I found very interesting. It's endangering the world by the constant growth of economy. Our ecological footstep is much bigger than it's supposed to be. And this is very much related to this sick dogma in a way. But there's also another piece which comes into my mind, Narrow House. At the very beginning, it was a reaction on a specific situation in a show at this Ulan Center. It's a huge, gigantic museum. And for some reason, the curator gave me kind of small and long and narrow rooms. And in a way, this annoyed me. And I tried to make something out of this. So I started to make a squeezed house to show that they squeeze me in my potential making a great show. So I started to make this idea with the narrow house. But then very fast, when Narrow House was finished, I realized I came automatically back to my parents' house, which is a house built in the 60s, which brought me back to a very specific society, a post-Second World War society, which brought another problem. It was a very, at that time, still rigid society. So the house, it showed very intensively this claustrophobic society from that time. So the beginning was very different, and it changed into this, for me, interesting shift. I remember writing down some 20 years ago that everything I do is a sculpture. It was a conscious decision to bring up a red line which is going through my work because I wanted to work about the notion of sculpture as a theme in my career and relate this to social issues. This was always very important for me. And the notion of sculpture is a big thing because it has to do with 2- and 3-dimensionality, skin, surface, mass, volume, time. I'm constantly trying and looking for new ways of, in between my boundaries, in between my borders, to develop the work. And one thing was always, when I made the narrow house and these narrow things, flattening things very much. So for some reason I had this idea to make something very, very flat and still in a way functioning as a sculpture, and that brought me to these paintings. It's another world and I loved it very much. You're floating away into these ideas. First is the word. I look for a word which fits me and then I define the form. It's very much interesting to make them nearly abstract, that you can hardly read them, that there's a distance between what is obviously the word and what you see, and you have to fight for it. And many people anyway are not able to read it. So this fight or this distance, this difference I like very much. Growing up in Austria, and in Austria is a country with very intensive action and expressionist paintings like Giulia and Kokoschka and many others, and the Viennese actionists like Nietzsche and Schwarzkogler and also Rainer and Atzing and all those people. They use very intense colors, dramatic colors, I would say. And as I'm more interested in the marginal, in the
not in the drama, not in the big thing. I also wanted to step back with the color. But those, I would say, is the palette of my body of work, because I use pink very often. I use this light blue, and I was very much working about the skin itself. This also relates to the notion of sculpture, because remember, the first or the early sculptures of the Romans or the Greek, many of them were made in bronze, and they consisted only of a very thin layer of bronze. So it was a kind of a skin who defines the volume and the body. And then, of course, we're wearing also the second skin, the cloth. About clothes, I was working also intensively in my career, and this brings me to this. What I try is to measure, to take the sculptural measurement on our time and to look what's coming out. So when we add volume or take volume away, what we do every day by eating, gaining and losing weight, that's the first experience with sculpture what we have. When you're conscious about this, something is happening or something can happen. I'm very much interested to get rid of figuration and to go slowly to the abstract form. The work was leading me to this because it was inviting me and say, be more radical and make it more smaller, that you don't easily recognize what it was before. So it's a strong relation to both of them, both of the works.